Unconfirmed reports said Tito Jackson suffered a seizure during a quiet road trip somewhere between leaving and disappearing. Hours later, he was pronounced dead in a small hospital, alone, with no family member by his side. No emergency statement followed, no tribute aired, no breaking news banner ever appeared. For a man who helped build one of the greatest musical legacies in American history, his death passed almost unnoticed. Most people remember Michael. Some remember Janet. Few remember the man who held the first guitar, kept the rhythm steady, and stood half a step behind the spotlight so the others could shine. Tito Jackson was there at the beginning, but absent from the ending. And when he died, the silence was louder than any applause he never received. So why did no one speak? Why did no one come? And what happens when a legend forgets the man who kept it alive? Stay with us. This story was never supposed to disappear. The man behind the shadow. The brother you saw, but never truly saw. Do you remember the man who always stood slightly to the left of the stage, holding a guitar while history was being made? Most people never learned his name. They only knew him as Michael Jackson's brother. But before there was a king of pop, before the screams and the glittering lights, there was Tito Jackson, the first Jackson to touch a guitar, the one who kept the rhythm steady when everything else threatened to fall apart. Night after night, Tito stood half a step behind the spotlight, counting time in silence, making sure every note landed exactly where it should. He didn't sing the lead. He didn't take interviews. He didn't step forward when the crowd roared. His job was to disappear so the music could survive. As the Jackson Empire grew, so did the distance between fame and recognition. Albums went gold, legends were born, and documentaries were made. Yet Tito remained a shadow inside the very legacy he helped build. In the end, the empire remembered the voices, but forgot the man who kept them in sync. The house that swallowed him, where silence became a sentence. While his brothers toured the world, Tito Jackson disappeared into a house at the end of Havenhurst Drive in Encino, California. It was only 38 minutes from Michael's mansion, yet it felt like another universe entirely. Nearly 3,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a small garden once meant for meditation, but Tito didn't buy it for comfort. During the tour, he asked only one question: is there any room that's soundproof? From that moment, the house stopped being a home and became a boundary between Tito and the world. For nearly 30 years, neighbors barely saw him. No music spilled from the windows. No guests ever arrived. The porch light turned on every night at exactly 7 p.m., as if time itself had frozen there. Inside those walls, Tito slowly vanished from public memory. What the world saw as retreat was something else entirely, a quiet exile, chosen not for peace, but for survival, hiding wounds fame had never healed. A childhood without shelter, where fear learned to breathe. Long before Tito hid in silence, he learned it in a small wooden house in Gary, Indiana. 11 people shared 2 bedrooms, and privacy didn't exist. Tito slept on a thin mattress in the hallway, waking each morning to someone else's feet, waiting each night for darkness before resting his head. But the real terror came from his father, Joe Jackson. Joe was not just a parent, he was a commander. Practice was mandatory, even through illness or exhaustion. Mistakes were punished with a leather belt, and tears meant longer rehearsals. Once, after Tito dropped his guitar, Joe slapped him hard enough to split his lip and locked him in a shed for hours. No light, no comfort, only fear. That was where Tito learned that silence was safety, obedience was survival, and rooms with closed doors were dangerous. Years later, he would leave lights on and doors open, still haunted by a childhood where music was not nurtured, it was forced into existence through pain. A guitar without a voice. Necessary, but never visible. Tito first stepped on stage in 1965, but unlike his brothers, he was never given a microphone. Joe handed him a guitar and told him to stand behind the others. From that moment on, Tito became the foundation no one named. He played flawlessly, but his role was to vanish into the background, making sure the rhythm never failed. When the Jackson 5 signed with Motown, America saw a miracle. Michael sang, Jermaine harmonized, Marlon danced, Jackie spoke, and Tito played, always playing, never speaking. He wasn't allowed to sing solo, write lyrics, choose songs, or pursue a solo deal. Even on records he helped shape, his name appeared last, if at all. For years, he counted beats silently while history unfolded in front of him. The applause never reached his hands. The spotlight never found his face. Tito Jackson wasn't invisible because he lacked talent. He was invisible because the system needed him to be.
The night the mirror broke, when silence turned into rage. By 1984, the Jacksons were at their peak. The Victory album sold millions. The tour filled stadiums, and the world believed the family was stronger than ever. But behind the celebration, Tito discovered something was missing. Nearly $40,000 from his share of the profits. When he asked questions, no one answered clearly. Accounting blamed confusion. His brothers avoided the topic. Michael hugged him, said nothing, and looked away. That night, Tito returned to the Encino house alone. He walked upstairs, stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and stared at his reflection for nearly an hour. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist into the glass. The mirror shattered, cutting deep into his left palm. Blood dripped into the sink, but Tito didn't move. It wasn't the glass that broke that night. It was the last belief that loyalty would be returned. From that moment forward, the anger he had buried since childhood began leaking into the walls of the house, quietly and permanently, where no one else could hear it.
Tito Jackson left this world the same way he lived most of his life, quietly, unnoticed, and without ceremony. There was no tribute concert, no documentary special, no moment of silence on the networks that once made billions from the music he helped create. His name faded from headlines, then from memory, as if it had never belonged to the stage at all. Yet somewhere in a dust-covered house in Encino, the rhythm still lingers. Unplayed tapes sit in silence, letters meant for sons remain hidden behind walls. A guitar waits for hands that will never return. Tito was the first to hold the beat, the one who made sure the music never collapsed, even when he did. So the question remains, who do we remember and who do we erase? Because sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't dying alone. It's living an entire life as the man who kept everything together, only to be forgotten when the lights finally went out. The woman who used his name, love, silence, and a fatal mistake. For years, Dee Dee Jackson was the only person who called Tito by his real name, not by his position in the family. They married in 1972, when fame was loud and hope was still possible. Dee Dee believed Tito deserved to be seen, and for a time, her belief held him together. But inside the Jackson household, she was never welcome. Joe Jackson dismissed her as useless to the empire, an outsider with no fame and no value. At family gatherings, Dee Dee sat in silence at the far end of the table, ignored even as the mother of 3 grandchildren. Tito saw this, but he never defended her. His silence, learned long ago, became his greatest failure. As the years passed, touring replaced home and distance replaced marriage. When they divorced in 1993, the break was quiet, almost invisible.
Tito kept only his guitar and documents, never realizing that by staying silent again, he had just lost the only person who truly saw him.
Letters that never arrived. Losing a wife, then his children. 1 year after the divorce, Dee Dee was found dead in a bathtub at her boyfriend's apartment in Los Angeles. The police ruled it an accident, though neighbors reported shouting and a heavy thud that night. Tito never appeared in public for the funeral, and the world judged him cold and absent. What no one saw was the man sitting alone in his living room for 5 hours, writing 3 handwritten letters to his sons. He addressed each envelope carefully using blue ink and sent them through a friend so they wouldn't be blocked by Dee Dee's family. The letters never reached their destination. 3 days later, the court declared Tito emotionally unfit and stripped him of custody. His children were gone without a goodbye. Tito stood through the ruling without a word, then walked out before anyone else stood. In that moment, he lost more than a family. He lost the last role that made him feel real. From then on, silence wasn't a habit, it was a life sentence.
Forgotten even in death, still outside the frame. When Michael Jackson died in 2009, the world stopped. Cameras flooded the streets, music filled the air, and the Jackson family gathered behind closed doors to decide the future of Michael's 3 children. The court approved Katherine Jackson, then 79, as their guardian. She was trusted, respected, and seen as the family's final anchor. Everyone agreed, no one objected, and no one mentioned Tito. He sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, hands folded, eyes lowered, as if he already knew the answer. No one asked if he wished to speak. No one invited him into the conversation. When the hearing ended, Tito left early, walking past reporters without a word. Even after his brother's death, he remained invisible, a man erased from the picture while standing inside the frame. The radio in his car stayed off as he drove away, the silence louder than grief. Michael was gone, yet nothing changed for Tito. He was still the brother who didn't exist, even when family history was being rewritten without him.
Replaced by his own son. The final disappearance. In 2012, Katherine Jackson vanished for nearly 10 days, sending panic through the family and fear through the children she was raising. The court suspended her guardianship and called an emergency hearing. This time, a replacement was needed. Once again, Tito sat silently among his relatives, waiting for someone to speak his name. No one did. Instead, the court appointed T.J. Jackson, Tito's own son, as guardian of Michael's children. The reason was simple. He was younger, stable, and close to them. No objections were raised. No one looked at Tito. The decision was unanimous, and the gavel fell like a verdict on his entire life. Tito didn't hug his son. He didn't stay for the end of the hearing. He turned and walked down the courthouse hallway, hands clenched in his coat pockets, understanding something he had never faced before. He wasn't just forgotten. He had been replaced. The role of protector, of elder, of father, all taken from him without a single word.
Replaced by his own son. The final disappearance. In 2012, Katherine Jackson vanished for nearly 10 days, sending panic through the family and fear through the children she was raising. The court suspended her guardianship and called an emergency hearing. This time, a replacement was needed. Once again, Tito sat silently among his relatives, waiting for someone to speak his name. No one did. Instead, the court appointed T.J. Jackson, Tito's own son, as guardian of Michael's children. The reason was simple. He was younger, stable, and close to them. No objections were raised. No one looked at Tito. The decision was unanimous, and the gavel fell like a verdict on his entire life. Tito didn't hug his son. He didn't stay for the end of the hearing. He turned and walked down the courthouse hallway, hands clenched in his coat pockets, understanding something he had never faced before. He wasn't just forgotten. He had been replaced. The role of protector, of elder, of father, all taken from him without a single word. A man locked out of his own life when silence became permanent. After 2006, Tito Jackson stopped performing entirely. Invitations stopped coming. Old contracts were never renewed. He had no manager, no lawyer, and no access to his own royalties. The email tied to his accounts belonged to a former manager, and no one in the family remembered the password. Slowly, his name disappeared from booking lists, then from memory. By 2013, tax notices began arriving at the Encino house, $5,000 a year, folded and tucked into a kitchen drawer. By 2020, the debt exceeded $27,000 and foreclosure warnings followed. Tito never called anyone. He never asked for help. The house decayed quietly around him, roof stained, gate rusted, porch lights still turning on at 7 every night. Only after his death did anyone learn how he survived. Hidden behind a painting were envelopes of old cash, saved just to keep the lights on. It was the final proof of a life lived in disappearance, surviving but never truly living.